back to these giants. Let's go all the way back, Stephen, to Genesis, and basically tell us who these giants were.
Well, in Genesis chapter 6 in the Old Testament, it talks about the sons of God, and the word there is Nephilim, that saw that the daughters of earth were fair and basically left heaven, came to earth, slept with, had sex with the earth women, and produced a hybrid race of giants. The Bible uses two words. One of them is Nephilim, which basically is translated in Genesis 6 as giants. There were giants in those days. And then in Numbers 13:33. What's interesting, that means before the flood and after the flood. What's happened, George, is that there's a term thrown around. Everything's a Nephilim. Number one, a demon is not a Nephilim. A demon is not a fallen angel. Fallen angels don't seek to inhabit human bodies, although they can transform themselves into different personages. That's a given. A giant was not 100% human. It was 50-50. And so the book of Enoch and the book of Giants, both Dead Sea Scrolls, talk specifically about the judgment that would come upon the giants for basically abrogating God's order and rule in the universe. Every single myth and legend, for 40 years I've been tracking them down, and always goes back to this idea of the gods having sex with earth women and producing superheroes. Obviously, Hercules is probably one of the most well-known in Greek mythology.
Good point.
But one of the things that's fascinating, one of my listeners sent me this guy named Brett, and I said, thank you. Suetonius was a Roman historian. Now listen to this. He basically served under Nero, and he said, he recorded Nero, but he said this. He said, Nero was eager, it is said, to get hold of a certain Egyptian, a sort of ogre who would eat raw flesh and practically anything else he was given, and watch him, Nero would watch the ogre tear live men to pieces and then devour them. These successes, as Nero called them, went to his head, and he boasted that no previous sovereign had ever realized the extent of his power. Now, back to Genesis 6. Genesis 6, when I first published it, I think 15 years ago, obviously I hadn't had the following 15 years to integrate, new findings from antiquity. Where I used to dismiss Polyphemus, who was a one-eyed cyclops, that tradition, and the ancient historians that were over 400 feet tall, I just thought, no, that's just an exaggeration because they don't know how to count. Well, these are guys that built Roman aqueducts and were pretty good at architecture, so they evidently knew how to count. Or the Colossus of Rhodes that used to literally span the harbor 100 foot. So while I was doing the research for the revised edition of Genesis 6, what I came upon was a masterful piece by Edward Woods of the oldest, somebody through the years, through hundreds of years, had cataloged some of the biggest individuals, and I'm talking big guys, I'm talking 100 to 400 feet. Well, there are people say you can't have giants because gravity would keep their body mass a certain size, and they couldn't see that. Well, they don't get it. The giants had a supernatural element to their life force. When I talked to the pilot that flew the dead giant, and during the break, Tom asked me to, remind him, and I looked it up. It was Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Evidently,
that's where we think they took him, right?
That's where we know they took. That's where he dropped him off, but they don't know. Obviously, the pilot wasn't privy to where it went from there. Okay. So that wasn't necessarily a final destination, but it was definitely where he dropped it off. He was met, he said, with the typical intelligence, spooks, everybody, he said it was just like you would imagine in the movies, total blackout. The point being is that Genesis 6 giants is what I call the Rosetta Stone of history, and understanding architecture, understanding science. The fallen angels taught their offspring, and this is in the book of Enoch, it's in the Apocrypha, it's not the Bible, but it is referred to in the Bible. They actually make reference to the book of Enoch. And the point being is Enoch was a scribe, lived to be 360 years old. There's only two people in the Old Testament that never died. One is Elijah, who's taken in a flaming chariot to heaven, and the other is Enoch, who the Bible says he walked with God and was not, for God took him. Well, then you fast forward to the book of Revelation, and when the Antichrist literally shows up on the scene, there's going to be two witnesses. And they're going to have this supernatural power of God that was expressed through the prophets in the Old Testament and Moses during the Exodus to basically call down fire from heaven just as the Antichrist does. So the point is that there's two gentlemen in the history of the world that basically just went to heaven, if you will, in a chariot, or I don't know how Enoch left, but they spoke specifically. And here's what people have got to understand. Now, the book of Enoch is basically parcels and little fragments, okay, of parchment put into some sort of an order. Not all of them exist, that the Illuminati controls all the real artifacts. Just like I said on Tim's Alvarino's trip to the Altiplano, the high-altitude plains of Peru and Bolivia, there is someone who makes a 24-hour-a-day watch on all out-of-place artifacts. It's kind of like a novel where there's a hidden hand. Same kind of thing I referred to the Matrani in my book Long Walkers, which actually has a letter that the pilot sent to me. I think I've sent that to you years ago.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm trying to make, and specifically, is that the Book of Giants talks about not only did the fallen angels mate with earth women, but they basically corrupted every animal and life form on the planet. And whether they did it sexually or genetically or harmonically, I don't know that. But I know this, that the fallen angels could transform themselves, and that's still, even the Bible teaches that the devil himself can transform himself into an angel of light. Seduction, if you will. I've covered that. Lilith, the night hag, in the Bedouin tales of the desert is always, if you will, a female succubus demon that takes on the appearance of a beautiful woman, obviously sexually allures a man and then devours him, okay? Lovely. That's actually where the term man-eater came from, just historically. So as I've tracked down all this stuff, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter from one corner of the earth to the other. There is this central theme of the fallen angels and giants. Now, obviously, when you get to the book of Revelation, it says that Satan and his existing angels get thrown down on earth, and then there's a battle like no other in history. And then you're dealing with some people say, all those things, scorpions and everything in the book of Revelation, those are just metaphors. Well, I got news for you. The ancients basically cataloged everything from satyrs. They cataloged half men, half lions, which the Bible talks about the lion men of Moab. Imagine a bipedal lion, and that's what the lion men of Moab look like. If you take the genetic corruption of everything, dinosaurs, whatever it is, now, obviously, this flies against classic evolution. Classic evolution and anthropology obviously are trying to show the missing links, and the missing links are fallen angels, okay? And so that's why the new version of Genesis 6 Giants, I reproduced about, let's say, 30% of the old, just because it's background that's important, but it came up with about 165 illustrations, over 200 new pages of all the antiquity stuff that I'd missed before. So it's kind of interesting. It's like a time lock on knowledge. The more time, as time carries on, this stuff starts to manifest. And again, if I could tell you that I've been told, and I've said this on this show, that by special operations generals that work in ultra black, where people don't even know their units exist, that the number one reason for going into Iraq wasn't even to overthrow Saddam Hussein. It was to acquire the antiquities.
And the gateways, huh?
And the gateway. They wanted Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the oldest epic poem in the history of the world, who was half man and half fallen angel, and the point being is they wanted his DNA. Imagine Jurassic giants, okay? We obviously, through Michael Crichton's work, he brought the attention to the reconstituting through genetic manipulation of extinct species. Well, imagine this. Imagine getting the DNA of these guys, and then the human spirit is not in them. It is a demonic spirit, okay? And then those demons, a disembodied spirit, that's what the Greek word means, comes and reanimates those guys. So welcome back Goliath, okay? And all of his buddies. And the Bible in 2 Samuel talks about Goliath having brothers, and they had 6 fingers, 6 toes. And I've heard some people that just make stupid statements on how big Goliath is. Goliath's beam, Weaver's beam, when you're talking about a 120-pound spear, that isn't some guy that's in the NBA throwing that.
No, this is a big, big person. And David was just a human size, right? He was just one of
a human size.
Yeah.
And then the teaching came in from the Catholic Church that the sons of Seth married the daughters of Cain. Well, God says in Genesis everything after its kind, likeness and kind, okay? So humans, even if one group of humans is evil and the other one is righteous, they're not producing giants. So there had to be a supernatural element. Now, this is where it gets interesting. All of the technology of the giants, we've talked about Vimana flying machines. I think that, was fascinating. NASA had some kind of astrobiology conference, I think about 6 months to a year ago, and the Indians from the nation of India show up, and they show up with Sanskrit blueprints, of Vimana flying machines, talking how to build them, talking how to propel them, and talking about how to control them. In essence, can you imagine a 4,000-year-old flying saucer manual? That their scientists in India is not a slouch when it comes to science, okay?
Not at all.
The history of India is filled, and again, their epics are filled with every form of modern technology. Now, it brings us to CERN, okay? CERN is trying to find the God particle. That's what they're talking publicly.
Have they powered it up yet? They're getting close.
They powered it up to 5.3 or 5.7 trillion electron volts. They haven't gone full power, but interestingly enough, how's this for a unique signature? They power it up, and then you have the Nepal Kathmandu earthquake, and guess what the first thing to fall is? The temple of Shiva at Kathmandu. If you will, the patron demon of CERN is the cosmic dance of destruction. I hope people see the irony there. I believe it's a prophetic picture.
Weird, isn't it?
It's not only weird, but here's the deal. I have been contacted by scientists through cutouts at that establishment saying that they're seeing entities, okay? Entities. Seeing, if you will, giants. You remember the old Irwin Allen? I think it's Irwin Allen that produced it, The Time Tunnel?
Yes, he was very good. He did that, and he also did
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. He did the submarine movie.
The Poseidon Adventure?
No, he did a TV show,
right?
Which was a submarine show.
Yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about.
See something or whatever it was.
Yeah, but anyway, in the time tunnel, they had the ability to look into the time tunnel and view, So now we're in the realm of CERN. They're using so much power, and the literal shape of CERN corresponds to the Ouroboros. Well, the ancients, the Milky Way and its path through the heavens every 26,500 years. So the point is that now you've got a black hole. Imagine a black hole on one end, a black hole on the other end, and a tunnel between them, and it puts the book of Revelation into real popular light, especially when it says, "Woe unto you, inhabitants of the earth, for the devil has come down amongst you." It's almost like that Superman movie, and I'm using this as an example, not saying the Superman movie proves the Bible, but just to say those people writing so many of the movies have an insight, and it's given to them. And one of the Superman movies, they had a prison, and the prisoners were caught kind of like in a plane that they were floating through space on, and they get down to Earth and are released from a plane, another plane, a multi-dimension. So what CERN is doing is opening up dimensions that God in His love for humanity closed off. And now that everybody in the world is looking for ancient artifacts, ancient technology, and primarily ancient weapons, it's fascinating to me that there's nothing new under the sun, quoting Solomon. That which has been will also be that which is, meaning, that everything old becomes new again, kind of like Back to the Future.
Do you think we're in the apocalypse now, Stephen?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that we are, the word the apocalypse means the revealing. I believe we're literally starting the Great Tribulation. I believe that we're going to see, look, there's no other way to explain it. People could laugh, call me crazy, call you crazy, do whatever they want to do, but they can't explain the events that are unfolding as they were prophesied, 2,000 years ago. And I want to remind everybody that the book of Revelation is about the revealing of Jesus Christ. Jesus is telling everybody what's going to happen with the seven seals and the breaking of and the sounding of the seven trumpets and the pouring out of the
and
seven
how many,
vials.
by the way, my granddaughter sent me a text yesterday, and she said, Papa, how many trumpets have sounded so far? They were talking about this in college. What number are we at?
Well, I don't know that, okay? But the point is before that happens, we've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now look at the famine that's on the earth. Look at war, and it was given one of the horses takes peace from the earth. I mean, you and I are talking about Jade Helm in this country. We're seeing war. We're seeing World War III getting built, and there has to be a false Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon comes after a Third World War, because after the Third World War, the man of peace comes on the scene. Now, the war between Christians, the rapture versus no rapture, I'm one of the guys that said that people are going to go through the tribulation. Well, when I come on your show and say that, oh boy, But here's the thing, that we're in a series of events that people are saying any day now we're getting out of here, and they're not getting out of here. Those people that have been destroyed and for their faith, are basically being martyred all over the world, and they're just as real in their love for God as the people who are in the United States are. We become so lazy that we don't even want to do our homework and see what the Bible says is going to happen. Because I'll tell you one thing.
We're afraid maybe, huh?
We're afraid, and that's what motivates everyone. So, when I talk about Genesis 6 giants, and by the way, the people that have read that book, it's gone around the world. The second version, I printed, I don't know how many thousands, and literally 2/3 of them are gone. From all over the world, they're saying, I never understood this. When Tim got an invitation, Tim Alberino, who did the, good night, our expedition documentary, and I'm talking about the trailer now, he got asked by the university down there in the Amazon to address their staff because not one person had ever been exposed to the fact that the Bible talks about giants. Tim said, Steve, everybody down there believed in the aliens except the atheists. The atheists who didn't believe in God said, well, this makes more sense. So it's just one of those anecdotal things that proves that people know that the official party line, see, that's the problem, George. You know what I think of mainstream news. I think it's basically like taking a bath in hot vomit, okay? And sorry, but I don't, pay any attention to them whatsoever, because you can flip the channels and they're all using the same headlines, the same words. That tells me someone's script writing their statements to give, tell a lie, tell a big enough lie, tell it over and over, and pretty soon everybody believes it's true.
Stephen, I want to take some of your predictions. You're not a psychic, but I want you to give us some predictions that you think could occur over the next year or two. Zecharia Sitchin, in his work, of course, The 12th Planet, I think he pinpointed this pretty accurately, Stephen, but there are a lot of deniers out there. How come?
Well, I think it's because archaeoastronomy, archaeology has been under the control of what I would call Illuminati, the illuminated ones who want to use it to their advantage. It's the same thing with giants. It's the same thing with the massive architecture. It's the issue that, as you know, I sent Tim, I think I sent you a copy. Did you see the trailer to our expedition documentary?
Yes, I got that.
Well, I sent, Tim and the film crew down to Peru and Bolivia, and people want to see it. It's on my website. But here's the deal. When they went into Bolivia, George, even the people that were on the Peruvian side of Lake Titicaca couldn't figure out why the Bolivian government was clamping down on tourism. Tim said, his exact words were, you would have sworn you were in Nazi Germany. He said they had to hide their cameras, and he said people with megaphones, and he said the last thing I wanted, Steve, was to end up in a Bolivian jail. Well, I think everybody in the world would want that. But what they found was an interesting group of people that were talking. Now, these people were the ones that spoke, I believe it's called Quechua. It's the pre-Spanish language that obviously the Spaniards translated into Spanish. And the older, listen to this, George, the older occupants in that whole area, Lake Titicaca is at 13,000 feet, obviously famous places like Tiwanaku, the Gate of the Sun, all the stuff that you see on the Ancient Aliens channel, etc. What was fascinating is that there's been a new find of pyramids. It's not what's on top of the ground that's the real story. It's always what's under the ground. Same thing in Giza, same thing at Angkor Wat. In other words, there is a orchestrated control of true antiquity, the artifacts, the out-of-place artifacts. And so what we were able to do, and I believe this is really an amazing feat, was to get our film crew in there and by using, hidden cameras, etc., get into some of the places that are now being blocked off the public. Here's why I think that is really quick. The U.S. government used to buy off a lot of Latin American, South American, Egypt, all of the areas where the true history of the giants, the ancient building blocks, all of the massive structures in South America, where some of them stand directly pre-flood architecture, obviously my position is built by the giants. Post-flood architecture, they stand in contrast. But even the Gate of the Sun is admitted in their 100-year-old reports that it was moved from one area to the other. So what they've done is they've placed some of these monuments in a non-astro-archaeological position where they don't belong. Tim and the film crew went to Amaramuru. That is literally a Stargate location. While they were there, listen to this. While they were there were some shamans. They were creating sounds. And I've been told by special operations generals that it's the sounds, harmonics, that operate Stargates. Most people say, man, what's that guy drinking? Well, I'm not drinking and I don't smoke anything. So the point is that while they're there, it's a normal day. They camp out at night. They train their cameras on the Stargate, a giant door cut into a solid piece of mountain and rock, and all of a sudden they encounter the worst hailstorm exactly over their location, okay?
Huh.
Even the natives that had to come and push out their rental bus that they got there with, from one of the cities in Peru, they were astounded. So what's fascinating to me is you've got the harmonics of Stargate. So what we're doing with True Legends, the documentary series, is basically we were in Sardinia about a month ago. I'm not, I'm the guy producing it and getting it all done.
Yeah.
But the point is that the same thing. They were followed by agents. I said, well, you guys, make sure you film those guys because it sounded like, seriously, a Raiders of the Lost Ark. I said, did the guy have on round glasses and a black leather jacket? Tell me he didn't. But when they were in Sardinia, it's fascinating. The younger people believe the alien stuff they see on TV, whether it's Sardinia or in Peru. But what's fascinating is that they all have the same stories to talk about, that these are their words, and I'm not anti-Catholic, but immediately emissaries from the Vatican come and they take the giant artifacts, whether it's from Sardinia or literally from Lake Titicaca, and they talk to an 80-year-old guy with very few teeth, a great smile, though, seriously, on a raft. There's people that actually live on rafts in Lake Titicaca, and he was talking about the same story. So why is it that within the space of 2 months, whether it was in Sardinia or in Peru/Bolivia, that the elderly people who are eyewitnesses to these, including the gates opening, are saying, this is what we saw, this is what we know. And did you have Tom Horn on last night?
Yeah, I sure did.
Yeah, well, Tom and Chris Putnam.
And Chris was on, too.
Okay, yeah, and they're on a parallel but totally different thing. Now, did they talk about the Stargates in the desert Southwest?
They sure did.
Okay, so listen to this. Tom and I didn't compare notes, ladies and gentlemen. He and Chris are on the desert Southwest. Tim and the film crews, two different times, are in Sardinia. The same events, and fascinatingly enough, the same stories that Tom probably shared with you, the PhD, Dr. Mose, I believe his name is, and what he was talked about in the kivas and the gateways to hell and everything. Well, as I get emails from people all over the Native American reservations, they're talking about the gates opening. They're talking about orbs. Now, listen to this. Tim is standing, it's actually in the documentary film, he's standing on a spiral on the bottom of a stone at Tiwanaku, okay? What's interesting, the spiral in the stone in Tiwanaku is like every spiral throughout the desert Southwest, where they always have a spiral and a little flute player called Kokopele, okay? And remember, the gates open by sound. In the Tom Horn's, and I was with Tom, by the way, a couple weeks ago in Missouri. We did about 4 TV shows for Skywatch TV.
Yeah, he was mentioning you.
Yeah, And by the way, the fascinating thing was, here's the funny part, George. He's in the Southwest, six-toed giant footprints right by the spiral designating the Stargate. Tim is in Tiwanaku, right by the spiral on the ground, designating the Stargates. When you see the footage, and you've seen the trailer, and ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage everybody to go to my website and see this because it's an amazing trailer. By the way, Tim lived in the Peruvian jungle for 10 years and has got stories that will curdle your blood of what he's seen. So we're on the trail of the live giants in Peru. We're on the trail of live giants in different parts of the world, not dead ones, okay, not bones,
real live ones.
Live ones. And George, you were the only guy on talk radio that ever had a pilot on that could come clean and basically say he flew a dead giant out of Afghanistan, and that's a true story. By the way, he's been in my office. He brought in all his military stuff, Air Force, he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt. And by the way, he started out his conversation when he sent me the letter, and I think he was kind of kind on your show, but he said I was full of you-know-what, and he thought I was crazy when he was listening to me until he was tasked. And they took the giant, the red-headed giant, who was a cannibal. They took him to, I think, one of the military bases in Germany where he dropped him off. And he said before they could even fly the giant out, they made him give up their phones and their cameras and everything. But he said, fortunately, he said, when you're in the air, no one's looking. We were able to take the tarp off and take a look at the thing. And he shared with me specific things. So here's the thing. There are some things I don't talk about, so I don't just get my own information back to me, okay? And this is one of the things that you don't want blowback. I don't want to say something and then somebody just listens to us and wants to say, yeah, I saw a giant and blah blah blah, and read your own stuff back. So there's certain things that I keep not hidden, but let's just say this: I don't reveal them, so I know the people really.
Well, it's like a psychic who's telling a police officer about a crime scene. They don't report everything. They don't reveal everything.
Correct.
And if that psychic hits on it, then they know there's something going on here.
Right, and I asked that pilot, by the way, who is still alive, which is surprising to me, but just for the record, after he came on Coast to Coast, they gave him every crappy detail that you could imagine. He said, Steve, they put me in where they knew I'd get killed, but he said, by the grace of God, I was kept alive. This is a real person, okay? So why do people cover this up? Let's get to that. Because it tells a different story, and I agree with Zecharia Sitchin's findings. I disagree with his conclusions. Zechariah talked about the Anunnaki. Obviously, I believe fallen angels. The alien people that believe the aliens created humanity can't tell me who created the aliens.
Yeah, you're much more spiritual than he was, I think.
Well, but I tell you what, I can fault his conclusions, but I basically got to tell you this, when you're looking at some of the evidence, and so what we're doing, George, we're presenting the greatest cover-up in the history of the world. I'm telling you, it's that. When Tim was in Sardinia, they were followed. They ate in restaurants, they were followed. They went out to specific places, and the military or the police would show up out of nowhere, always. We had protocols and procedures, obviously, so that our telephone calls were not monitored. There are ways to do that. Emails, so it wasn't monitored. They had satellite uplinks because we are, by the grace of God, trying to show the people the evidence, then let them make up their minds. But they're a fascinating thing. They're in Peru. This excites me, and they run into an engineer that's talking to them about how the giants were able, using frequency, to turn a rock, solid rock, into more of a putty.
Why did the giants end up as cannibals?
Well, it was interesting because in Numbers, the book of Numbers, Joshua and Caleb go into the promised land to spy it out, and they said we were as grasshoppers. They said that the inhabitants, meaning the giants, devour one another. I think it's twofold, George. Number one, the thing is that they had, and pun intended, they had a big appetite, but also I believe it was based on if you will, a genetic encoding in their very DNA from their fallen angels to basically destroy mankind, okay? That was the purpose of Satan coaxing or commanding the 200 original fallen angels to come down on Mount Hermon and pollute the human race, okay? The Bible promised that Jesus, the Redeemer, would come at a point in history. And so I believe that the whole idea was to wipe out mankind. And interestingly enough, you can't go any place. South America, we know about the Aztec, Incas, and Mayans. It used to be they wanted, the historians wanted to deny that they were cannibals. Tom Horn, Cris Putnam in the West, they talked about the Native Americans and the experts of their old real traditions talking about the giants. You probably heard this, and maybe they talked about it, coming through the portals and eating the natives,
Yeah, they just wiped them out.
They just wiped them out. And Easter Island used to have a curse. And remember when the Easter Island statues called the Moai, M-O-I, where you only saw from basically just a little bit below the shoulders up, and finally someone started to
dig down.
Dig down. They found that these were really big guys. They had a curse. National Geographic carried it, and it said, "Your grandmother's flesh lies rotting in my teeth," okay? So they literally ate themselves out of existence. And what's you can't get away from it. The Desert Southwest, the Anasazi, the ancient ones, it was just a horrific, and that's what a lot of people don't understand about the Aztecs, Incans, and Mayans. Not only did they have all their human sacrifices tearing the hearts out of their victims, but they ate them, okay? They ate them. So they could have literally had famines due to weather, and ultimately, you got two of the guys. Who's the last man standing? The guy, obviously, with the toothpick.
Steve, the Yellowstone caldera, then we'll go to these calls as they line up here for you. They've just said that the magma flow underneath is now much larger than they anticipated.
Well, absolutely, but I want to share something. Alaskan earthquakes and Alaskan seismic events, the pool actually heads north up through Canada into Alaska, okay? And I actually am pretty much intimately aware of the latest project to map it. One of my friends was up there taking photos of it. He happens to work for a major magazine. I won't say which one, but you could probably guess, the biggest photographic magazine in the world. And the idea that Yellowstone's going to blow, Yellowstone's going to blow, Yellowstone's going to blow, people have got to understand that 50% of the geothermal features in the world are pretty much present and resident in Yellowstone. It's got tens of thousands of vents. As you know, I fly over it. I take aerial pictures. I was just down there a couple weeks ago. Probably one of the only guys, just because I live so close and I can go down there in less than an hour, 30 minutes in a helicopter. And over 40 years, George, I've taken pictures of all the mineral terraces, the springs, Old Faithful, Giant Geyser, all the main Castle Geyser. Yeah. And I can tell the calcification taking place of calcium carbonate, where they used to have all these colors. The colors, by the way, in the images that you see of Yellowstone, those are called thermophile bacteria, and each bacteria has a specific range in which it can live. I mean, some of them are just within a tenth of a degree, and that's what produces the color. Well, to say all that, you can see that the whole, if you will, Yellowstone plate is shifting to the south. That's why Jackson Hole had a massive landslide, what it was a year or two ago. But the fascinating thing is when Alaska has seismic issues, that's when Yellowstone, I've personally been in Yellowstone Park when they've had hundreds of, micro tremors. But the idea that it's going to blow, there's so much pressure that's being released and has been released. It's just like I think I've shared on Coast before. The BBC and somebody else emailed me before the Banda Aceh quake and obviously the tsunami that killed so many people. And so we want to come to Bozeman and film you and talk about the imminent blowing up of Yellowstone. I said, good luck, guys. You need to get down to the South Pacific. Yellowstone's not the issue. What I can tell when I fly over Yellowstone Park, obviously in the winter, I know where the main vents are, and when there is absolutely no melt of the ice over the biggest vent in the middle of Yellowstone Lake, there's nothing going on there, okay? So they can say the magma chamber is 4 times, 6 times, and people say, well, it's going to blow, it's going to blow. Well, the point being is that there are other areas right now that are blowing, and Yellowstone is not one of them, because people forget we had the great big earthquake in that part of the country, and it released a lot of stress on the plates and stuff. So, Yellowstone is the least of my personal worries, okay?
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Stephen, about the rapture. We had Harold Camping a couple of years ago before he died, the radio station owner, talking about how people were going to get taken and they emptied their bank accounts and everything else and nothing happened. And his group basically is still saying the same thing. They've now put another date. I think it's October. And they keep coming up with this. What is the rapture, and what does it really mean?
Well, in my opinion, how many times do they have to be wrong before, they admit that maybe they got it wrong? 1988, flashback, there was a book named Edward Wiesenhout, and, I don't want to spell it, but that's how you pronounce it. 88 Reasons Why Jesus Was Going to Come Back in 1988. Every time someone sets a date, they have a new finding that moves it forward. It's kind of, I call the forever mañana person factor. It's always tomorrow. The thing is that, and guys like I was won to the Lord Jesus through Hal Lindsey's ministry, but obviously I take a totally different view of the rapture than he does. The rapture is a taking away or a catching away, this is their definition, not mine, of the saints prior to the Great Tribulation. Jesus prayed to the Father that God wouldn't take his kids out of the world, but that he would keep them through it. The point that the Christians are at war, literally at war, and will be coming to war. Tom Horn wrote a book called Blood on the Altar, and it appears that if you want to get into a fight, take on the rapture. That's what I kind of alluded to earlier in the show, George. But the rapture is a coming for Jesus separate and apart from his second coming, when every eye shall see him. Jesus said, as the lightning rise from the east to the west, so it's going to be during the time of the coming of the Son of Man. So the second coming of Jesus is when Jesus returns. Yet the rapture people believe that there's a great catching away prior to the second coming of Jesus. And obviously, the tribulation period, and by the way, I reject that 7-year tribulation. Jesus had 3.5 years of ministry on earth, 42 months, and I don't think God gives the devil twice what he gave his son. So saying that is the fact that the time frame I see as critical is from 2016 on. I believe we're going to go through the toughest 42 months the world has ever seen. And the Bible says if God didn't shorten the days, there would be no flesh left alive. Every last man, woman, shall be wiped out. But he said, yet for the elect's sake, those days are going to be shortened. So the rapture is an event that people believe will get them out of this world before all the bad stuff in Revelation happens. That's simplistic. I mean, I have argued with people. They have their text. I have my text. But I say this, at least admit that things are getting really bad now. And I'm hoping that they take serious the admonition. Noah prepared to the saving of his family. It's funny, too, that your granddaughter would ask you that question, because that shows, how old is she?
She's going to be 21 next month.
Well, happy birthday to her ahead of time.
She's the oldest of the group, believe me.
So 21, but yet that tells me that she's looking. See, I believe that, seriously, I believe that the Bible has answers, and I'm not a classic, quote, evangelical Christian. I'm not. Those guys have a hard time with me because I don't buy the classic dispensationalism. That's one of the points of dispensationalism that they've taught. And camping was always wrong, okay?
Always. Yeah.
Always. And so was Edward Wiesenhout. And so were these guys, because it's always some new event. Now it's the Shemitah and the 4 blood moons, the tetrad. What happens when it doesn't happen?
The Shemitah's supposed to hit us in September.
Yep.
And the prediction is the stock market will plummet to nothing. That I've marked down. Let's see what happens on that one.
Right, and look, it's just like this. Here's what we know. We know there's going to be great earthquakes. We know Jesus said, nation will rise against nation. That doesn't just mean Russia and China against the U.S. and, everybody else in a global war. That literally means ethnic against ethnic. And look what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the greatest stirring up of ethnic strife. I maintain that civil rights were a lot better off before than they are now. The problem is
is that most people who think they're getting out of here are not acknowledging. I think it's a psychological defense mechanism, the lateness of the hour. And when you see hundreds of thousands of Christians being slaughtered across the world, primarily in the Mideast and in Africa, and not a peep out of the administration, and there used to be a time when America stood for righteousness. America stands for nothing, and you know the old statement, he who fails to stand for righteousness will fall for anything and will be taken over by unrighteousness.